That's right, the title of this video is true. I will send you $500 if you are the first person to complete this nightmare of a game I've made. You see, I have a habit of making my games a little too difficult to complete, and this one is no exception. So I decided to reward the hardcore players in the best way I can. 5 Benjamins. The game is free. There's a link in the description for the itch.io page. You can download it now and give it a shot. But I would stick around because I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to get through this challenge and the rules to getting the $500. So this is a devlog. What is this game? Let's start from the beginning. When I was 12 years old, I walked home from school through a tunnel under a highway. In fact, let's just go there and I can show you. This is the actual tunnel I walk through every day. It's pretty dark and spooky. There's slime, creek water on the floor, and graffiti all over the walls. But it's here in the middle of the tunnel that's important. My younger self was walking home from school and decided to shine my flashlight down this drainage pipe. All I saw deep in the darkness was a pair of eyes staring back at me. Yeah, I sprinted out of there. I was spooked. It was probably just a raccoon or something, but it gave me enough heebie-jeebies to scare a young whippersnapper. What am I saying? That wasn't the end of my fear, because later that night I had quite the intense nightmare. In the dream, I was set up in a camp on the street above that same tunnel, and as the night fell, I knew I had to defend the camp, but for some reason I just wasn't allowed to leave. You know, the most bizarre situations in dreams kind of just make sense. That was the case here. It was then the most terrifying creature started coming out of the drainage pipe. There were these dark masses of what can only be described as Lovecraftian horror. I watched a lot of sci-fi horror movies with my grandma at the time, and I guess I had an impact on my developing brain. Dream me fought these dark beasts and did my best to defend the camp before waking up in a hot sweat. At the time, I really wanted to make a game about this dream, but I was 12. I didn't have a good game development software, and I didn't even know how to code. So recently, having more time to do game development, and that I've been able to hone my skills a little bit more from a middle schooler who was too nervous to talk to their crush, I decided let's make this thing a reality, and I can make it so unbearably difficult that I can offer a cash prize to the person who beats it first. But how do I turn this obscure dream from many years ago into something playable? Well, I love arcade games. This is a miniature arcade cabinet of Galga, undeniably my favorite arcade game. And what I love so much about it is that it's simple. Your only objective is just to survive as many waves of enemies as you can before you inevitably run out of lives. Every time I'm at a restaurant with a Galga machine, I'm dumping a few quarters into it. Of course, a Galga-esque scenario wouldn't work too well in the dream, but you'll see how it influences the game. To fit the dream, the layout of the level looks similar to the tunnel, with the street above and enemies pouring out of a portal slowly making their way to destroy some sort of defendable pylon while attacking the player along the way. Now, 2 sides would be a little too hectic for the player to manage, so let's cut the tunnel in half because, as you'll see, simplicity is the key to this game. Also, the player needs to be constrained to the play area, and invisible barriers are kind of a lazy way of doing that. My first idea is to have tall walls trapping the player in, but it just feels a little too claustrophobic. I was toying with different ideas until I came across a picture on the pixel art subreddit. Also, a great place for inspiration, I might add. I can't find the original picture I saw at the time, however, it was a floating island, and it made me Google search a bunch of the same pictures. And that was it. The player will be on a floating island with some platforms on the side to get down into the lower tunnel and defend a light pylon from the dark creatures flooding out of a portal. I can finally open Game Maker and make this a reality. Let's start with the platform mechanics since that's my strong suit. Add a player box, a solid box, some code, and now we can jump and move around. It's coming along, but has no form, so let's start to set up the floating island scene. Add a solid box on top, a solid box on bottom, one on the side, and then some platforms for jumping up and down. That's it. That's the whole game. Except it's not fun, so let's add in some enemies. If the player box hits an enemy box, the player gets hurt, jumps back a little bit, and starts flashing as it loses a little bit of health. Hey, ouchie, ouch, hey, ouch, enemy box. That hurt. We need a way to retaliate. The player can now aim with the mouse and shoot at a long, thin box when they click. If the enemy hits this long, thin box, the enemy gets hurt. If the enemy gets hurt enough, the enemy dies. If the player gets hurt enough, the player dies. Now, this is a game. But like the appendix, it has no purpose. When the enemy spawns, it moves to the right. When it hits an invisible trigger, it changes direction. And then if it hits the pylon gets hurt. If the pylon gets hurt enough, the pylon dies. Now at this point, all I have to do is just add a bunch of enemy waves and boom, a full-blown AAA title that I can release to the public unfinished and charge a premium. I'm not pointing fingers. there's no artwork in the game yet. So let's grab a color palette from Low Spec. Low Spec? This one looks good. It's the Low Spec 500 color palette. Now let's draw the player in the environment. I really want to express that I don't want to spend too much time on this, so I'm making the art sprites really small, like 8 by 8 pixels small. Starting with the environment tile set, pretty chill, it's just dirt and grass. The player's going to be kind of funny looking because there's not a whole lot of room to draw. This is what I came up with. The legs are literally 1 pixel big. And look at that hunchback. This here is you, an agent of light, defending the last island in the sky from the dark creatures, like these jellyfish. The lore is shallow, but simplicity is the theme of this game. Back to artwork. This is the portal that spawns the enemies. And where are they going? To destroy the pylon, the true beacon of light. So I guess you're like an agent of the beacon of the light. None of this makes any sense, but just remember it's based off of a dream, based off of a tunnel I used to walk through as a kid. Speaking of walking around, you know what's pretty cool? Grass. It's like nature's carpet that folds under each step. So here's some thin blades of grass that wiggle and fold when the player steps on it. It's subtle, but I don't know, I think it's pretty satisfying. Also, this is a floating island. Let's add some clouds and a camera system that parallaxes the background. Now, the enemies in my dream only came out at night, so let's figure out a way to transition from daytime to a dark, starry sky. I did some research, looked at shaders in GameMaker, and I got scared because they're in a different coding language. Then I found out the alpha, or the opacity of a background layer, can be changed really easily. So here's a pretty simple but cool effect. Put the nighttime background above the daytime background in the room layers, then when transitioning to the enemy waves, slowly change the alpha of the nighttime background from 0 to 1. Nice. Now we just need to set up a wave system so you're not fighting the same wave of enemies every night. This is pretty easy, just a big old matrix with the type of enemy to spawn, the amount of that type, and the delay between each spawn. At this point, I can just keep adding enemies and waves until the game's done, but there's no real reward for killing enemies other than just not losing. Getting points for killing enemies is alright, but it's even cooler if there's a way to cash in those points. So let's make the player super weak to start, but every enemy they defeat rewards a sum of dark matter that can be spent in a shop to get cool upgrades like damage and accuracy. So to get upgrades, we need a shop location and a menu display. Shop is easy, quick little sprite, but the menu gets a little bit more complicated. I've never made a working menu for buying things because it requires scripts for clickable buttons in this mysterious GUI layer. Turns out those scripts are easy, it just takes a lot of icon drawing. So these are the upgrades. They don't have any description in game because I want you to figure them out as you play, but I think the icons are all pretty self-explanatory. So now we can keep grinding on enemy types. I'm not going to spoil all of them in the game, but here are a few. We of course have the jellyfish that float along their merry way. Then we have these smaller speedy globs that are a bit harder to hit and threaten getting to the pylon more. I want to point out the enemies have no outline, so when they group up, it looks like a dark mass of blobby horror coming to attack you in the pylon. I mean, look at all these jellyfish. It's like a horrific low-resolution centipede of doom. Also, forewarning, the enemies start getting a bit more abstract from here. I can only describe these guys as disembodied stomachs or kidney beans, but they start directly attacking the player. Oh yeah, and that whole difficulty thing I've been talking about, this is where it starts to ramp up. Think of this game as a bullet hell, like Enter the Gungeon or Nuclear Throne, but it's a side-scrolling platformer. Let me fill you in on a little secret though. A lot of the enemies that shoot at the player will set the speed and direction of the projectile to where the player is the moment it's created. As long as you slowly keep moving, most of these bolts will miss you and you won't get backed up too far. The kicker is when you have to take advantage of the penetration upgrade. If you want to line up enemies and maximize your damage output, you'll need to jump next to the enemies and then blast through a line of the crowd. That's when the enemy bolts will go haywire trying to track you and make everything more difficult. The game is almost ready to go, but I just need to add a couple more things like a main menu, options, sound effects, and I want to do some music. In fact, let's just start with the music so I can dust off this MIDI keyboard. The way I usually go about making music for games is 4 simple parts: chords, bass, percussion, and the lead. The software I use is called Ableton, which if you're a programming type and don't have much experience with music production, I would avoid this software because it's pretty expensive and very daunting when you first look at it. You can always check out a free trial if you're interested, but I wouldn't invest too much if it's something you're not super keen on. Anyways, let's get into it. For the chords, I usually just fiddle around on the MIDI keyboard until something comes together nicely. There's a whole science to music theory, so if you're interested in learning more about it, I would check out Andrew Huang's video, Music Theory in 30 Minutes or Less. It covers pretty much all of the basics to music theory and can help out with chord progressions really quickly. And that made me think of this really cool and free plugin called Labs by Spitfire Audio. It has nice sounding string instruments. And fiddling around with the chords for a little bit led me to this. Now, more experienced producers will be at my neck for this, but I'm gonna just copy that chord progression and use it for the entire song. For the bass, it usually sounds pretty good if you just copy the bottom note of your chord progression, find a good instrument, and add a bit of a groove to it. And now for the lead. This is already sounding like a rock orchestra, so electric guitar seems like the way to go here. Luckily, Ableton has a stock plugin for that, and here's some electric guitar riffs. The percussion is pretty easy. Just find a couple drum samples and add your boots and your cats. Then add some chimey little ear candy and then extend out multiple parts where instruments come in and out, and boom, that's the main menu theme. Now when the player starts up the game, this is what they experience. Oh, I also added some options and various sound effects. Now the game is finally complete and ready for you to take on the challenge. Like I said in the beginning of the video, the game is free and the link for the itch.io page is in the description below. So here's the part you've been waiting for. How do you win the $500? First, I gotta say I'm sorry the game is only available on a Windows PC. If you have a Linux, you can run a Windows emulator, and if you have a MacBook, you can just throw it out. I don't have a good way of making sure there isn't any funny business and people aren't decompiling the game and cheating, so the rules are a little bit complicated. But if you really do want to compete, I figured that they shouldn't be too hard to follow. There's a total of 50 waves and a final end sequence that happens after you defeat the last enemy. All you have to do is record an entire uncut playthrough of the game, upload it to YouTube, and then send an email to lastislandchallenge@gmail.com with a link to your video. I won't click anything that isn't a YouTube link, so don't send me your video to download. I will email back the first person that sends me a link to their full legitimate playthrough. Quick disclaimer, I am based in the United States and I don't really know how the laws work with sending prize money to other countries, but don't worry if you're not in the US, we'll figure something out. Also, feel free to send me some of your incomplete playthroughs and comment down below what you think of the game because I'll be making a follow-up video on all of this. If this video goes well, I might do something similar in the future, but if you missed out on this challenge, I'd consider subscribing. You'd be the first to know about future challenges and other weird games that I might make. Other than that, thank you for watching, play the game, and good luck!